Now then, returning to rugby, European rugby in particular, Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent is here in studio. Thank you for coming in.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
Very well, as you head down to Munster for press conference later on this afternoon. So weekend 1 of the Champions Cup is done. Weekend 2 is upcoming. There are only 4 rounds, of course. We are whittling down 24 teams to 16, so there's plenty of room for error. Of the provinces, as you know by now, I'm sure, Munster against Stade Francais Saturday was a fairly routine win, 33 points to 7. Toulouse later that afternoon, 61 points on Ulster. Some big names on the bench for Ulster, it must be said. They're targeting their home game this weekend coming against Bordeaux. But it was a mauling at Stade Ernest Vallon. And then Bristol 12, Leinster 35. Leinster's bench almost embarrassingly good. And Leo Cullen did not like the questions post-match about the strength of depth that he has at Leinster. We'll come to all that. This weekend coming, Cian Tracey will be there for the Irish Independent on Friday night, cast host Munster. And then on the Saturday at 5:30, Leinster will welcome Clermont to the Aviva Stadium. Before that, Ulster at home to Bordeaux 3:15. And of course, in the Challenge Cup, Connacht beat Zebre 43-12. So that's about where we are. We'll start with the game you were at, Thomond Park. I guess there's a certain curiosity about Munster now and how they'll rebound post Graham Rowntree and others. He's not the only one to have departed, we should say. Their interim coach is Ian Costello. Talk about the game first, if we can, for a moment. 33-7. Stade Francais, you're a disgrace.
Yeah, I suppose in more ways than one, really, Joe. Their discipline was absolutely shocking. They had 2 red cards. Both their locks were sent off within 4 minutes of each other for 2 scandalous pieces of play, really. The first one nearly taking Peter O'Mahony's head off, and then the second one putting Craig Casey into an unmerciful position, turning him upside down. Now, I know he did put him back down on his side, but that really wasn't the point at all. The second you do something like that, you're going to be walking. And I actually thought the captain was very lucky at the end of the game to not be at least shown a yellow card. I think Luke Pearce had gotten his card out 3 times already. Alex Nankerville, you could argue, was probably a bit lucky as well. He had a high shot, but just so indisciplined, Joe. The lack of ambition that they showed, which I think has been a theme across the opening weekend. It was a pretty underwhelming, I think, overall, just a bit of a broader view. Underwhelming opening weekend. You saw Cass sending a second team to Northampton, Stade sending a second team to Thomond Park. Even Ulster, you touched on it there at the top of the show. I was really disappointed that they didn't put out their full choice team. I understand the reasons why each of those teams did what they did, but at the same time, I don't think it does the reputation of the Champions Cup any good at all. Now, you could argue that the tournament organisers have brought this on themselves by changing the format so much, because like you said, Joe, there is plenty of room for error. Like Munster got to the round of 16 last year by winning one game and drawing another. So I think that just fed into a pretty mediocre opening weekend. But for Munster, like, that wasn't really their concern at all. And I think they did really well to build on the Lions win. You'd almost forget that URC weekend the week before, because we were all so focused on Ireland and Australia, but Munster had a very good win over the Lions. Their first competitive game since Graham Rowntree obviously left. There's been a lot of changes going on there, and I thought for the most part they were very, very good. Even before the 2 red cards, Munster were by far the better team. And actually, weirdly enough, when Stade went down to 13, Munster actually lost their way a little bit. I think they'd felt like the game was won after Tom Farrell ran in the bonus point try. They emptied their bench. They brought on a couple of younger guys as well, and they just lost their shape. I think they'll be really disappointed with that, because Stade actually got a consolation try back, and they looked much better, weirdly enough, when they were down to 13. So I think all in all, it was a very good night at the office for Munster, because you think back to the same time of last year, Joe, they drew at Bayonne against a second string Bayonne team, so they didn't make the same mistake twice, which was very pleasing.
I think rugby is a real problem in this area, like a big problem. It's a disgrace, actually, the way these professionals treat so many fixtures. Like, when you consider you are professionals, you are there. Fundamentally, you may say I'm there to win, but actually, as a professional sports person, you're charging fans money. You're charging television companies money. You're duty bound, I think, to do your best. Mm-hmm. So, like, Stad, I know they're having a tough season. They've sacked their coach. They lost all 4 pool games last season. Leinster put 43 in them last year. They've sort of stopped being an entity in this tournament. They have been in 2 finals, long time ago now, over 20 years now, give or take. But like the last decade, it's just not trying a leg in this tournament. By that I mean just not naming their best side. And then that infuses the whole occasion with permission for them to not perform. Mm-hmm. And then you think to yourself, okay, cast on Friday for Munster. The way we talk about these fixtures is when you can almost realise there's a degree like of Stockholm syndrome. You're accepting madness. What we're now saying about that game is, oh, that will be a good game because at least Cast are at home, mm-hmm. in brackets, so therefore they'll try. And obviously Munster away from home will try. Like, you try and assess Cast. They're 7th in the top 14. They've won 6. They've lost 5. Would you care to guess their 5 losses and their 6 wins? Were they home or away? I mean, it's so at home, this Cast team beat Toulouse. They beat Racing. Away from home, they've lost to Van and Leon this year, the bottom 2 in the table. Mm. The bottom 2, and they can beat Toulouse at home. They've lost to Power at 10th. They go to Northampton at the weekend just gone. They lose 38-8. As you said, not a strong team. You're a Northampton fan. What are you paying in for? If you're a Munster fan, what are you paying in for to see here? This attitude is very much embedded and accepted in the top 14. How? I don't know. I mean, O'Gara has spoken before, like his borderline bemusement with it, like trying to rail against it. I'm really glad, with a few exceptions, the Irish provinces don't go in for that. I mean, at Christmas, there can be a degree of, well, look, away from home, we won't play our best guys.
Well, Ulster did it now, to be fair.
Ulster did it this weekend. I sort of accept the Ulster thing in that they're doing their damnedest to get out of the group, and it's Toulouse away. Now, I don't like it, and I don't think they should do it, but I understand they're saying, let's get out of the group and we can maybe beat Bordeaux at home with our best. That's where the competition structure has a case to answer. But some of these French teams, it doesn't matter what the structure would be. They'd be doing it anyway. Ulster are taking advantage of a really poor competition structure. And I just think a sport here, and we'll come on to it later on, which is talking about, oh God, will Netflix come in and buy us, or streaming services, or this tournament's dying, what can we do about it? You see, it's because the players and the coaches are treating it with just like abject disrespect. I mean, if I was a Munster fan and I paid into that, I think, well, I'm not going again to see Stade France. It's a joke. Mm-hmm. Like, the whole thing's a joke. These are professionals who are there to win games. They're not trying to win games. They're just like, oh, let's turn up and take our beating, and it doesn't matter. And again, we don't talk about this all that often because we're just a bit beaten down by it. But you think of the equivalent, which is the Champions League in football. Real Madrid have been beaten 3 times this year because teams have a go at each other. They play their best teams. It's supposed to be the pinnacle. Mm-hmm. You kind of think, like, sod the lot of you. Why are me and Cian here talking about it on a Tuesday?
I pretty much agree with everything you said there, Joe. You ran through Cast's away form. Stade have lost every single one of their games away from home in the top 14. Now, I suppose Cast and Stade would argue that their priority, now I know Cast are in 7th in the top 14, is to survive in the top 14 because the money that's worth to them. Realistically, they're not going to win the Champions Cup, but at the same time, you've presumably worked hard to qualify for Europe's elite competition, and then you're kind of just saying, well, we'll just go for our home games. And I thought what was really jarring at the weekend in Thomond Park was the fact that Stade left both of their props on for the 80 minutes. They didn't change them because they had their first choice props on the bench. Clearly they were like, okay, there's no point in really bringing them on. When do you ever see that? Like, granted that Andrew Porter plays 70 plus minutes a lot for Ireland. He does it sometimes with Leinster too, but you very rarely see neither of your props being substituted. So I thought that summed it up as well. Paul Gustard has come in, like you mentioned, as head coach, and it just did nothing for the competition at all. Like your old cliche, Munster could only beat what was in front of them. They played some really good stuff, and we shouldn't detract from the good rugby. I know we'll get on and we'll give them their due credit as well, but it's going to be very different for them in Cast this weekend because Cast are at home and they're thinking, well, okay, now we can put back out our full team. But with only 2 home games now in the new pool, you're just saying to certain teams, you're just saying, well, we'll just go all in for 2 games and like you said, Joe, sod off the rest of them, which if you're trying to attract supporters, if you're trying to get people to pay for TV subscriptions, whatever it may be, it's not really going to work. And look, I think if we're all being honest, this competition won't really get going probably until the quarterfinals. I know we have the round of 16 as well, but you'll probably see a couple of dead rubbers in that as well, just by the nature of it. And I think back to last year, the final was incredible, and that kind of is what you're left with in terms of that epic between Leinster and Toulouse. But the road to get there wasn't that thrilling. And it seems that we're on a similar enough road this time around. Now, look, I thought the quality of rugby on show over the weekend wasn't that good. I know it was played in pretty much the aftermath of the storm and all that. You do have to factor that in. The back of November, trying to start a new tournament in December is very tricky, I would say. A lot of people have had their fill of rugby. The diehards, of course, will be still tuning in, but I think your casual observer has just gone and watched Ireland for the last 4 weekends, watched their provinces potentially last weekend, and there is a bit of fatigue, whereas we should be celebrating this tournament. This is the creme de la creme, but it's not what it used to be, and it's pretty sad because it used to be the best competition in the world, and now you're kind of looking at it going, when teams clearly treat it with such disrespect, it's just not quite the same.
Yeah, I know. Like Jordie Barrett, I really wanted to play in this competition. I'm not sure you do anymore. You wanted to play in one 10 years ago.
I still think if you were to win it, like all that said, I still think if you were to win it, it means, you know, a lot. Sure. Because of the, like, once you get to the very elite, it's still a high class competition, but it's the road to get there. I think that's really tricky.
Yeah. Seeing as we kind of went down that rabbit hole, we'll circle back to Munster in a moment, but I thought Rory summed it up quite well in his piece in the paper where he just recounted his trip to Ashton Gate. And so him and several other journalists turned up at the stadium early on the assumption, well, we'll watch the Ulster-Toulouse match. And the people at the stadium said, well, we don't have Premier Sports. You know, and the number of people who have Premier Sports in the UK is minuscule. Like, this tournament, from the UK point of view, has disappeared. Rory mentioned Kevin Potts recently saying the union's income from URC and EPCR has dropped by 30%. And, you know, I think the organisers of this tournament, they have to be asked how well have they managed the strategy. So, again, it was reported over the weekend, Rory referenced it, that TNT Sports offered them 17 million for the rights, for the TV rights. And they said no. And they went out to the market. Market wasn't so good. They went back to BT, who said, well, we've just bought the Autumn Nation series. Our offer is not 17 million anymore. And they end up with Premier Sports, which again, the UK market doesn't really have. And so you're kind of sitting there at a venue for this big game between Bristol and Leinster, which shouldn't be on at 5:30, by the way, on a Sunday. It's not fair.
That's another problem, yeah.
And they can't even watch the tournament. I heard Rory saying as well that, like, talking to people working at the stadium, rugby fans, saying, oh, they haven't seen much rugby over the weekend because it's kind of gone. So this sense of this thing very much in decline is now exacerbated by the broadcast deal. So it's another aspect to this. Obviously in Ireland, Munster being on RTE is a real lifeline for the tournament, and it will hopefully, that free-to-air aspect will keep it more in front of house, and more people, I think, percentage-wise of sports fans now have Premier Sports. It's more established here than they do in the UK. So again, just that sense of, God,
a bit of apathy kind of.
We had something so good here for 20 years. Yeah,
and I think that RTE deal, I'm open to correction, is up at the end of the season as well. So you'd be hoping that it does remain on free to airs in that one game per round. Look, this is definitely more of an English problem, I would say, than an Irish problem, because I actually think the Premier Sports package for Irish rugby supporters is unbelievably good value, because you get every URC game and you get the Champions Cup games as well. It's more so over in England, and I guess a lot of Irish supporters would probably argue that why weren't the English supporters complaining, you know, as much when it was on BT, and the Irish supporters had to fork out because TNT is obviously where the Premiership is shown. So, look, the English attitude to the Champions Cup hasn't been great, you'd have to say, for a long time. They were a key part of trying to change around the format and different things like that to try and suit them better. Do they really have a genuine contender for the title this season? I'm not so sure. English rugby, I think the Leinster result again showed at the weekend, is a little bit overhyped in certain places. Leinster absolutely blew the second place joint top team out of the water. But yeah, rugby does have a problem, Joe, in that regard for sure. I think it's the the diehards who can afford it will obviously still fork out for it to watch their teams, but we're always talking about trying to attract new audiences and things like that. And if it is behind a paywall, and if you're already paying for Sky Sports to watch your Premier League
and TNT,
like it's a hell of a lot to pay.
Well, are you going to pay to watch Munster Stade Francais? Do you know when so it'd be one thing. Oh God, I have to fork out for Premier Sports now as well. Why would you fork out for the first 6 weeks of this tournament?
Because it's very fair.
We got to be real here. Yeah. This is a complete dud of a tournament increasingly. Yeah. It's really dangerous.
But I do think that again, if you're in Ireland, I think you get all the URC games.
In Ireland, it's healthy because it's still our pinnacle, and as you said, if you like your rugby, there's a one-stop shop now for your rugby, and that's very acceptable. But like, where's the joy for Ireland in winning a tournament that the English have checked out of and the French, 2 of their teams are into? Like, you then feel a bit silly putting, we're European champions on a pinnacle. Are we the only ones that are obsessed with this? And I know the English and French were maybe never obsessed with it in the way that the Irish provinces prioritised it, but anyone who's listening going, well, who cares? If the English aren't into it, who cares? Who cares about the French? Like, sod them. But then what are we left with? We're winning a tournament that lacks prestige then. Yeah,
I think the French teams do still. I mean, Toulouse do. You see what Rog has done at La Rochelle. He's changed the culture in terms of trying to win.
But they're exceptions, I'm saying. Like, so Toulouse are an exception, La Rochelle are an exception, Bordeaux will have a crack. But in the main, you don't want this nagging feeling of, God, Stade, Cast, Premiership teams, no one even watching it in England.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's our livelihoods as well. And it is, it's the sad, slow decline, but this has been the case for the last few years. And I think the tournament organisers need to get gripping as well, because you touched on it there, Joe. They had offered the package to TNT, and they went off and they got the Autumn Nation Series and then came back, which was absolutely fair enough on their part. And they had to accept Premier Sports deal, which apparently was a slashed price. So, you'd have to put the blame on them for that as well. So yeah, like this is a real downbeat way to start the show. I'm looking forward to my trip to Cast even more now on Friday.
It will get better.
Will it?
The knockout stages will deliver great rugby. They will. But the organisers have a question and a case to answer here, I think. And some of the teams do as well. Albeit I accept many teams have always sent weakened sides out in this tournament. That's not necessarily a new thing. But the new structure is exacerbating the wiggle room to do it. And Ulster took advantage of that on Saturday. So, of Munster, any performers you want to mention before I ask you about the post-Rowntree coaching situation? Peter O'Mahony was good.
Yeah, he was excellent. A real kind of throwback to, the classic Peter O'Mahony performance. I thought it was no surprise that he was in the middle of all the scuffles, and there was plenty of them, but his performance went far beyond that. I thought it was quite pointed actually when the Craig Casey incident happened. Now, Peter O'Mahony was right next there, but he was the one first in on the ground and letting the Stade lock know what he felt, because I was writing about this yesterday. My mind immediately drifted back to the first test in South Africa when
never happened again.
When Snyman took Craig Casey out. Now, Peter O'Mahony had just been off the pitch at that point. He'd just been substituted. Wasn't having a good game. Look, and I know some people think that you put too much stock in that kind of thing, but Andy Farrell, I believe, was pretty annoyed that the Ireland players didn't stand up for each other that day, and I just don't think that would have happened if Peter O'Mahony was on the pitch. And there is a part of me that wonders if this Ireland team needs, not necessarily Peter O'Mahony, but at Peter O'Mahony, a little bit more kind of aggression and fight in them, particularly when you're going to a place like Loftus, where that was. So, but his performance at the weekend was about far more than just the niggle. His line-out work was exceptional. Munster's line-out has been as bad as Ireland's line-out, and Alex Codling has come in as forward coach and seems to have an immediate impact. They won 15 out of 15 of their own balls. Peter O'Mahony stole a couple as well. He had a couple of lovely kicks, one clearance kick, one beautiful little grubber kick down the touchline that he gathered and passed to Takir Abrahams, who I thought was exceptional as well.
Yeah, we should touch on him.
Yeah, there's a guy that can put bums on seats. But I just thought it was a really excellent performance from Peter O'Mahony.
Takir Abrahams has had an injury-interrupted start to life at Munster. He's 25 years of age, never capped by the Springboks, but looks a very decent signing. Came from Leon.
Yeah.
This was kind of his debutant ball, really, in terms of Munster fans, European level, seeing him, and he was good.
Yeah, I was down in Limerick chatting to him last week, and actually it was a real reminder that you never know what's going on behind the scenes with players. So not only did he have that injury, I think it was 3 games into his Munster career, he has a newborn baby who's 5 months old, and he only spent the first month of her life with her because he moved to Ireland and there was visa issues in terms of getting him to Ireland. He didn't arrive till late in August, and his wife and her daughter had to stay in France before going back to South Africa. They only arrived in Limerick the week before last, so he has had a very tough time. He told us that the baby didn't even recognise his face and things like that, and like that's sad on so many levels.
I read the piece, that was amazing. And like 25, you're still a very young person.
Very young.
There's a lot to deal with, and we're fathers of young kids now. If you said to us that they wouldn't recognise us, you'd be heartbroken. Like, it's a really big thing, especially it's your first child. So I'd say he's had a tough time.
Yeah, like, I mean, your heart just went out to him. Like, it is moving to a new culture. I know France to Ireland isn't that big. He'd only spent 1 year in France and didn't end up playing a whole pile there. But it was just like the human side to rugby players that maybe we forget about at times.
What kind of player is he?
He's fast, he's electric. Look, Munster went to the market in the summer and they identified the need for speed, for want of a better term, and he is electric. He was a 100-metre sprinter when he was coming through school. I think 10.8, I think he said was his fastest time. He did athletics when he was growing up. So really quick, really fast, elusive. He's very much of the Kirtley, Arensa, Cheslin, Colby. Look, he wears a scrum cap and everything. I'm not saying he's as good as those guys, but South Africa just have this knack of producing players across the board, but these smaller, elusive wingers who pack a serious punch and who are very strong in the air. So we saw all aspects of his game at the weekend, and he was one of those guys, you're talking about, trying to attract new people to the game and get fans to come to live games. Well, here's a guy who every time he got on the ball, the Thomond Park crowd were on his feet. So his family were at the game at the weekend. He scored a lovely try from a beautiful Craig Casey pass, and I think Craig Casey has been playing exceptional rugby. He really picked up where he left off with Ireland. So just what a lovely moment to have his daughter and his wife in the stand in Thomond Park, and they're here now living in Limerick as well. So you would hope that he's able to get a clean run at it now and kick on, because he looks like a very, very exciting player.
Chris Boyd, we should mention. Mm-hmm. We're in the post-Rowntree era now. I was sort of asking you off air, are you getting any more crumbs about what happened? And it's all very tight-lipped still. So Chris Boyd is 66 years of age. He's from Wellington. He has come on board as a performance consultant. Not for a long period of time, but for the foreseeable. Most recently, he is said to have done a really good job as director of rugby at Northampton. He was there for 4 years, between 18 and 2022. Things like the academy and the general infrastructures of the place much improved, and you're seeing young players coming through at Northampton, and things are going well. So I suppose one, it's an acknowledgement on Munster's part that they need to improve the general organisation, and two, this guy seems to be a good choice.
Yeah, like Northampton won the Premiership last year, and I think Phil Dowson and Sam Vesti, who are the main coaches there, would put a lot of the credit down to the things that Chris Boyd had put in place. Look, a really smart appointment for Munster. He's only here, I think, until at least the end of January. I believe he's going back at Christmas to New Zealand as well. But really popular guy when he was at Northampton. I would have spoken to a couple of people about what he was like. So seems like a very good fit. Northampton and Munster are pretty similar in that regard. And it makes sense because, look, Ian Costello is the interim head coach, but he has a very important day job, if you want to put it like that, as Munster's head of rugby operations. So he's the guy behind the scenes who's making sure that everything is aligned. He's involved in, recruitment, different things like that, that the longer he's pulled away from that, you don't want that sort of side of the house falling down. So it makes sense to get him in. Ian Costello has told us that he won't have any say over who the new head coach is, but if that new head coach is in the building at the moment and he's impressed by what he sees from someone like Mike Prendergast, I think his opinion would carry a certain amount of weight as well. So he arrived in Limerick last Thursday. I believe he was at Thomond Park at the weekend. And yeah, he's just going to be, I don't think he's doing necessarily any on-field coaching. He's just going to be in the background, get little tips and advice here. But I think a really smart appointment from Munster, who have been very busy. I know we're getting on to talk about it for the last few weeks, trying to, not paper over the cracks, but try and plug the holes that have been left by all the changes that have gone on.
Which are, again, remind us?
So Graham Rowntree is obviously gone. That was the end of October. Since then, the forwards coach Andy Kyriakou has left. When we were talking after Rowntree left, I probably would have alluded to the fact that there were probably going to be more changes along the way, and that's what I was referring to. I think the unrest that was in the coaching staff seemed to be a bit of a split, that maybe the guys who have left, you've sort of seen, were on one side, and maybe the guys who have stayed were on the other. The other big change is...
we don't know what they were split over, do we?
I think training is...
Training load.
I'm going to give you a bit of background on that. The other big change is the S&C coach has left, Jed McNamara. Now, Munster haven't officially confirmed that yet. They told me, a spokesperson told me last week that he was on personal leave, but then Jack Rowley came out the following day and said that he had already said goodbye to the squad. So there you go.
Jack, shut up.
There you go. So I presume there's just contract things that they have to work out there. But look, the fact that the S&C coach has left mid-season as well would kind of tally with the things that you're certainly hearing. So they have changed up how they're training. Ian Costello gave us the 4 kind of changes that are there. I'm going to give you a bit of background to that now. He reckons that Munster's point of difference now is their unstructured play. Whether it's on transition, counter-attack, they're aiming for 40 minutes ball and play time. And against the Lions, it was at 42 minutes. And the highest that it had been this season was 36 minutes. So I think when Mike Prendergast came in a couple of years ago, they put a big focus on training fast, and I don't know, did they slightly move away from that? They became more stuck in maybe structured attack, and it's probably not Munster's, even though it was in the past, their DNA. I mean, their scrum and line-out, even though it's still obviously hugely important, that's probably not what's going to win the tight games. I think it's more Mike Prendergast's attack. So they put much more focus on the unstructured side of things. They felt like they weren't clinical enough in the red zone, as they call it. They were getting enough line breaks but not actually scoring enough tries. So they've kind of addressed that. They put a big focus on how they start the game and how they start second halves. I think they believed that they were pretty slow out of the traps, whether that was down to a heavy training load during the week, not being as fresh as they wanted to be. And then they had that really fast start against the Lions. Even they had a fast start at the weekend against Stad. And it's the same for the start of the second half. That's been a big focus as well. And the fourth one, Joe, is in Dennis Leamy's side of the house in terms of the defence. They have increased their line speed and put more focus on their collisions. So I think a lot of that is probably down to... a couple of the Munster players were speaking about being away on the Emerging Ireland tour recently, and that one of the big changes was that the line speed that they were playing under in Simon Easterby was just that bit faster than what they had at Munster, but they seem to really enjoy it. I suppose they're listening to what the Leinster players are saying under Jacques and Ian, but it's not that Dennis Leamy was playing a drift defence or anything like that, but it maybe wasn't quite as aggressive. So they've changed that as well. So they're the 4 key changes, which are all pretty significant. And
sorry, were these communicated to you by the coaching staff?
Yeah.
They were very open.
They're very honest. To be fair to Ian Costello, he is very honest, and I think he's conscious of the supporters and the hit that the reputation has probably taken by getting rid of Graham Rowntree, who was really popular. So they've been very transparent in terms of
what they're trying to do. They were obviously criticised for the lack of transparency around the Rowntree departure,
which is still ongoing.
So I suspect then I'd interpret that there's a degree of acknowledgement to the supporters. We can't just block you out totally. So here's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and they're 4 key changes, I would suggest. Not 2 of them in particular anyway, to make during the season. And then, like I said, to get rid of the S&C coach tallies with the way they were training. Like down in Munster last week, I saw a lot of IRFU tracksuits. I think Aled Walters was down there, Nick Winkleman, like all these employees of the IRFU. So I think they're down helping now as well to try and get them through this sticky patch.
The injury crisis, all of this kind of stuff, what's going on here.
Yeah, and it's been pointed by Ian Costello as well, how he's been saying how the injuries have cleared up and, you know, the SSC staff are doing a great job. There's been little, if you look closely enough, maybe that's me reading too much into
No,
things,
I don't think that is.
But it's been pretty pointed that they've got Dave Kilcoyne and Ollie Yeager, for example, are going to be back this week. Their injury list is improving. Now, it's still only a small sample size in terms of the last few weeks, but the mood down there is very positive. Like, I mean, I suppose players are going to play for the jersey anyway, and I think a lot of people from the outside were wondering how they were going to react to what seemed like a really popular head coach, and I think he was Graham Rowntree. But I was down there the week after he left by mutual consent, and I just bumped into a couple of them in Thomond Park. They'd just been finished training, and yeah, there was just you wouldn't have known anything had happened. And I think it's really helped by they have Mike Prendergast there, they have Dennis Leamy there. Ian Costello is a very safe pair of hands to come in and oversee this transitional period. Now they've got Chris Boyd. Alex Codling has come in as forward coach. Interesting enough, actually, as well, Sean Cronin is doing a lot more coaching with the senior team now. I watched him in the warm-up at the weekend. He's an academy coach, for anyone who doesn't know. I watched him in the warm-up. He was doing basically most of the scrum work with the pack. So it'd be very interesting to watch that space in terms of whether Cronin takes on more responsibility. And also Tommy O'Donnell is there involved in the senior team as well. So they've got a lot of experience there, and I think that helps with the sort of feel-good mood that's down there.
Bristol 12, Leinster 35 was the Sunday evening game. 7 points apiece at halftime. Dreadful weather conditions, which was a pity because these were two of the great entertainers going head to head. Bristol with their 36 tries in 7 games. Leinster, no introduction needed on that front. So we didn't get the kind of freewheeling game we might have hoped for. I mean, it's hard not to skip straight to the bench, is the problem here. Before the bench came on, this thing was still reasonably in the balance. What would you have said about the game up until that point?
One of the worst first halves of rugby I've seen in a long time. It was
all explained away by the weather?
No, not at all. The weather looked pretty bad watching on TV, but I actually thought it was a continuation of what we saw from Ireland in the Six Nations.
Can I throw you a theory on this? The more I thought about it, and I don't know why I didn't think of it during November at all. So we went from this season, last season, where it was generally acknowledged by lots of people that Leinster with Nina Barr focused more on defence and the attack slid in terms of the amount of attention they were giving it. And so it's natural to think if you're practicing something, you're going to be slightly less sharp at it. And so it's maybe no surprise that when they pitch it, summer in South Africa, fine, certain type of game, but they pitch it in November and the skill set is not as sharp as it used to be. And we're like, what is this problem with Ireland? Mm-hmm. Maybe we need to frame this as what is the problem with Leinster, because Leinster players make up the Irish backline. Their handling skills, maybe with this more Nina Barr focus, have slipped. And again, not to skip ahead to the bench too much, but just seeing as we're talking about this issue, it might not be an Ireland problem, it might be a Leinster problem. And case in point is Jordie Barrett came on and you saw a sharpness to his handling and his touches and his passing. And I thought to myself, this may not be like a seismic cultural shift that's about to happen, like Brad Thorne style or something, or Jennings and Leo Cullen. But I thought, you know what? As well as what he can do on the field, this might be a nice little reminder to the Irish players. There's another level to go here with your handling. Maybe you were there a while ago, maybe not, but it has slipped. That whole Joe Schmidt arrival, we're going to be the best passing team in Leinster, and the Leinster players saying, we're already pretty good at passing. Yeah. I thought Barrett showed a gap, actually, and so maybe this Irish problem is more of a Leinster problem. Discuss.
Yeah, world class basics, really. Because
that's a fair enough theory?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with it, actually. And the thing about Jordie Barrett was he was exceptional when he came on, but he didn't do anything like that you wouldn't expect.
The highlights reel is not like going to blow you away.
Exactly, yeah. But his catch and pass, his timing, like you mentioned, but that is the difference, I think, between the very elite players. They make the simple things look very, very easy. I would wonder if if we're going to see a more rounded Leinster this season. I think it was understandable last season because Nienaber came in and he said he wanted to rewire the Leinster players' brains because what they had been doing previously defensively was just a world away from what he wanted. Now, they're a full year into that. You can see that they're much more comfortable in it. I'm still not 100% sold on they are where they need to be, particularly when it comes up against a Toulouse or whatever. Leinster's problem is always going to be that there's only a certain amount of teams that can really, really hurt them. And like we've mentioned at the top of the show, Joe, we're not going to see that until the latter part of the tournament. Like Bristol, I thought were just so disappointing. They've been playing some excellent rugby in the Premiership. They're joint first, they're in second, whatever way you want to frame it. And they were really, really poor. And I think that shows, again, that the Premiership is just a little bit overhyped in certain places. And look, it's an exceptional Leinster team, but they barely fired any shots at them. So I still think I'm waiting to get a proper read on where Leinster are at in the grand scheme of things. They obviously have won all their games in the URC. They've played some excellent rugby, but I don't know how much they've been tested by a very, very good team yet. So I would expect them to pretty much cruise through the pool stages. Their big aim is to get a highest seed as possible.
Yeah, so average game up until the bench, weather not an excuse, just a continuation in November.
Yeah, I thought so. Like Ireland's, they did it against Australia a couple of weeks ago, like just compounding error after error after error for a team that was usually like, you'd see them in their huddles doing their big deep breaths. They were like this next moment focus, but that was a worrying theme for me across the month of Ireland's month, was that they're just making so many basic errors. Penalties again, and again it was like 2 yellow cards in that first half. So a lot of the similar problems. The line out had a couple of issues as well. So I would put it a lot down to that as well. But I thought Jordan Larmour's try was probably the turning point of the game. Even though it only got them back to 7-7, they were 7-0 down. Ronan Kelleher was in the bin, Max Deegan was in the bin. Leinster were down to 13 and they ended up scoring. Fortuitous enough try. Look, it was a clever kick in behind by Sam Prendergast, and we'll get on to talk about him, but it was an awful error from the Bristol defender who knocked it up for Jordan Larmour. But I think that was a real kick in the teeth for Bristol, who went into half time 7-7, and all of a sudden then they see Jordie Barrett running out for the second half, and was it 4 or 5 minutes into the second half they brought on Doris, Porter and Snyman. Look, and that
it was laughable.
Like that is I
think anyone watching just laughed.
Like of course, yeah. I mean, it's no surprise that was the difference between the two teams at the end of the day in terms of turning the game. So
Barrett fitted in at 12.
Yeah, so Kieran Foley, Leo Cullen said, went off with a back injury, so I guess that made his life a little easier in terms of bringing him in, but they reshuffled the whole backline. So what you had was Jordie Barrett went to 12, Robbie Henshaw shifted to 13, Gary Ringrose went out onto the wing, Jordan Larmour switched from the right wing to the left wing, and Jimmy O'Brien went to full back. Now look, I thought Barrett was exceptional. Like I said, I think Ringrose did okay on the wing. I wouldn't imagine Andy Farrell or Simon Easterby, as the case may be now, is going to be too enamoured with the idea that Ireland's 13 could possibly find himself playing out on the wing. And I think Gary Ringrose will do a job for you out in the wing. Of course he will, but it's clearly not his best position. So
he trains a lot on the wing as well.
Yeah, and if he ends up like he was number 23, wasn't he, against Australia, and then he is covering wing, but it's not his best position. No. And I think against an elite winger, I think he could be exposed. But again, is that going to happen over the next few weeks, or can Leinster put him out there? Yes, of course they can. So it's interesting that it's kind of like a Leinster and Ireland here, because when Jordie Barrett and R.G. Snyman signed for Munster, and Leo Cullen touched on this publicly around the Snyman signing, and I presume it's the same case for Jordie Barrett, that there would be certain restrictions, for want of a better term, that would be placed in terms of being able to use these guys in certain games. Now, he didn't elaborate on what that would be, but I mean, my sense from the outside looking in would be that, look, if James Ryan and Joe McCarthy are fit, and if their game time isn't through the roof, whereas you could argue Joe McCarthy's is now off the back of November, then those two guys have to play. If Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose are fit, then they have to play in the centre. But injuries are going to play a concern. That's more from the Irish point of view. But if you're Leinster and you're Leo Cullen, you're under a lot of pressure to deliver a trophy. This is why you brought in these guys. Snyman and Jordie Barrett are only here until the end of the season, unless they end up extending Snyman's stay. I don't think that will happen with Jordie Barrett. If you're Leo Cullen, if you're Leinster, you want to get every ounce that you can out of these guys. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because maybe they will go down the South African approach that Jack Nienarber obviously had a key role in terms of the bomb squad, whatever you want to call it, because you can see like they can turn a game on its head. So it worked out fine last weekend, but it's definitely going to be one to watch as the season goes on, whether Leinster do drop Ireland internationals for these.
Merritt, Snyman and Barrett have to start.
Of course.
Merritt.
Yeah.
It's not even a discussion, so it will be fascinating to see how they massage the whole thing. Good problem to have, I guess. We didn't mention Crowley had a perfectly good game. So we don't want to be cute. Hang on, you mentioned Prendergast. You did mention Crowley. It's nothing like that. But he did score 2 tries. The thing just to mention about Prendergast that is noteworthy and new, I suppose, which is why you would mention it, is one, he started. So that's a shifting of the pecking order. And secondly, well, look, there was a bit of speed in there as well. I'd seen him, he'd made breaks the 20s, sure. But this was like, okay, senior level, because he doesn't, we were saying yesterday on Bits and Bobs, his gait, his trot, it doesn't suggest speed. But he has enough speed to be a threat, enough of a threat that they have to give him due respect in a way that, say, someone like Ross Byrne, defences can push across. They know even if Ross Byrne was to make a dart, they'd catch him. Whereas Prendergast, bit of speed. So that's another little kind of tick in the pro column.
Yeah, he bristled at the question a few weeks ago ahead of his debut about his defence and being a little slight. He really didn't like that.
Whatever at the slightness, his defence is a problem.
It is, yeah, but he's still only 21 and he has a big frame. Like, he's a tall, rangy guy. Like, he can still put on a few kilos. And I did really like his answer that time about, and I'm not in a mad rush to do it. I know I can if I have to, I would say, and I would say he's the manner in which he scored both of those tries, and they were 2 exceptional tries, by the way. The way he ran off Jordie Barrett's shoulder off that set piece move was exceptional.
Brilliant,
the way he ran the support line for Orgy Snyman, 2 really good tries. And I would say he felt like it's the narrative around the out halves is at times a bit distasteful, I think. It's more social media, I think, than anything else. I mean, it's a 21-year-old exceptionally talented guy, and I think he's already in certain quarters been under pressure to prove people wrong, and he's only after breaking onto the scene. So it was very encouraging to see it, Joe, because that is what you want to see from him, isn't it? The triple threat. Like, clearly his passing and his kicking is very good. I know he had that kick out in the full at the weekend, but it was still a beautifully struck kick. He was very, very unlucky. His passing at the line is excellent, and now if he has the running game to go with it as well, you're looking at a much more rounded player. Look, he still has a long way to go to become anything like the complete player, but very encouraging. I think there's no doubt that what Andy Farrell did in November, I think, forced Leo Cullen's hand in terms of that selection. And, Kieran Frawley obviously played at fullback. Ross Byrne was on the bench. And yeah, like it's very interesting because Sam Prendergast has a lot of game time this season because he was on the Emerging Ireland Tour and started all 3 games as well. Before this weekend, he'd started 2 games for Leinster. Look, he's a 21-year-old, of course, he's going to be absolutely fine, but there's definitely been a big shift. And I thought the second try was probably a microcosm of the new Leinster, if you want to put it like that. It was Jordie Barrett's long pass out to Gary Ringrose. Ringrose linked with Doris and Porter, who set Snyman away. And then Snyman set up the try for Sam Prendergast. So you have a 21-year-old out half who's now, you'd have to say, Leinster's first choice. And you have Orgy Snyman making 40-metre runs. You've Jordie Barrett throwing wide skip passes. So this is what they didn't have over the last couple of seasons. So I thought that was a nice little microcosm of what they're like. Yeah,
short version, Prendergast is doing remarkably well. And he's handling all of this attention, which is so new to him.
Looks comfortable, doesn't he?
Yeah, but the national media spotlight, it must be, I guarantee you, someone his age, he is reading stuff, he is listening to stuff, he is paying attention to it. He shouldn't, but it's only natural. People are talking about you. If if suddenly you went from nobody talking about you to everyone talking about you, you'd be like, what are they all saying? Yeah. So he's dealing with all that remarkably well, so it's to his credit. And Crowley as well, because you know, he's done nothing wrong, and he's been...
And he played well. I'm glad you mentioned that.
He did, played well, yeah. So they both, the bottom line with both of them actually is they both looked mentally to be tough people, which is great. Leo Cullen did not love the line of questioning post-game, which is basically like, come on, Leo, this is not even fair. Us poor Premiership clubs, and look what you have. So he was kind of in hang on a second mode. Mm-hmm. He was saying things like, the majority of our players are homegrown. They come through the academy system. Huge amounts of time and effort goes into making sure we get the best lads out there. I think of the 23, only 3 were non-Irish qualified.
Yeah, and Robbie Henshaw wouldn't have come through their system, and I think the rest would have.
So, you know, not all Irish born, but Irish qualified. So it's, you know, 20 of 23 is a good number. He said at one stage then, Gus McCarthy, he's a year 2 academy player in Leinster. Is he experienced? Thomas Clarkson, 24-year-old tight head who's come through the Leinster academy system. Is he hugely experienced? No. So he's kind of batting away this bench kind of stuff. And he said, we want Leinster people playing for Leinster because that's important and that's the fabric of the club. Now he wasn't ranting and raving, but there was just a degree of, can you all just settle down here and stop painting it as if we're the Galacticos? I don't know where I stand on it. Like, wouldn't be accepting the poor mouth either, you know. They have a huge budget, big budget. They have centrally contracted players being paid by the IRFU for forever. They are filling out the Aviva Stadium. It's, you know, it's very useful to be in a capital city. Their school system is the equivalent of La Masia in football terms, and it's privately funded. So, like, I'm like, come, these plucky underdogs over here are just trying to make their way in the game. Can we leave off them? It's somewhere in between, I suppose.
Yeah, and Leo Cullen tends to he always brings it up if they play like a big French team that look at their, you know, their budget and they've players from all over the world. And I'm a bit on the fence, a bit like you, by the sounds of it, Joe. I know. I think it's wrong to position them as like free spending mercenary. Yeah. They're not Toulon, but they have many advantages. Absolutely, and like you've caveated that by literally outlining all the advantages they have. They can't do anything about that. Like that is their.
They can either harness those advantages or waste them, and they're harnessing them. Good on them.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, just to play devil's advocate, it's been a long time since Leinster have gone to the market and signed elite overseas players.
When is the last kind of Rocky Elsom type? Who's the last one that made you go, oof? Snyman and Barrett are too big.
That's what I mean. Like, I'm even like struggling to think like players in their absolute prime. Yeah. It's very hard to
Brad
think.
Brad Thorne, I guess, is
that's a long time ago.
Splash, yeah, that's
long time ago.
That's 12.
Like look at the guys who they've replaced.
James Lowe, but not really.
No, wasn't an international. I'm talking about like world class players like Snyman, less so Rabah Slimani, but Snyman and Barrett, who would walk into a lot of World 15s. It's been a long time since they've gone there.
Easton Asewa was kind of a fluky, an all black in disguise.
So like they kind of, when they do go to the market, I don't have a huge issue with it because it's rare for them to do it. Now, Leo Cullen would argue, well, we've lost the last 3 Heineken Cup finals. We haven't won a trophy in the last 3 years. We need something different to get us over the line. Now, you could argue, well, Leo, that's on you. You have enough talent at your disposal to do that. But they're bringing in something different. It's not on a long-term deal. It's pretty much they're all in on this season. And if you look at the players, Joe, that they replace, so look, Slimani, who I am putting in a different bracket, to be honest, but you could argue is an upgrade on Michael Alalatoa. Snyman has replaced Jason Jenkins, who I think has 1 cap for South Africa, a very different type of player. And Jordie Barrett has come in for Charlie Natai, again has a handful of caps for the All Blacks, was pretty much past his best when he came in, had a really bad time with injuries. So they have stepped it up massively in terms of their recruitment, and if it gets them over the line, it gets them.
Jack Nienaber thrown.
Jack Nienaber, of course, Tyler Blaine there. Like, I mean, they've gone all in to try and win that elusive star that they haven't been able to win with the players that they have. Now, again, you could argue that that's down to the coaching, but Leinster aren't a club who do this all the time by signing players in their absolute prime. And if they feel like they need it, if they have the resources to do it, look, the Jordie Barrett one came around fortuitously enough in terms of how he became available, and he wanted to come to Leinster as well. He's only here for 6 months, so I can understand why supporters of other provinces would be up in arms about it, particularly the central contracts. That is an issue because so much of their budget is being paid for by the RFU. But if you're Leinster and Leo Cullen, then I can understand why you feel that need to defend your reputation, because they're not, at Toulon is a good example, Joe, they're not like that.
No, I think both things can sort of be true.
Yeah.
We're done. You got to go to Munster press conference.
Yep.
You're going to Cast on Friday. Will Slattery said yesterday you were served cheese and wine the last time you were in the press box at Cast. The president himself,
yes,
or herself, him,
yeah, it was a him.
He came in with cheese and wine for the journalists.
Yes, like Cast, I don't know.
Would you know good wine? Or did he serve you the slop that they didn't want in the box?
I would spoof it like every other person, Joe. Cass isn't the most glamorous place on earth.
Where is? Give me a...
It's about an hour from Toulouse. So you fly into Toulouse and about an hour from there. But not the most glamorous place. A bloody hard place to go and win a match like we discussed at the weekend. But the welcome we got was very good. So I have high expectations now this weekend that maybe even a bit of mulled wine for the time of year that's in it. But Friday night,
nice atmosphere,
bitterly cold. So yeah, hopefully the president is there with the red carpet out.
So your predictions for the weekend: Leinster at home to Claremont at Viva Stadium. I presume that's Leinster.
Yeah.
Ulster at home to Bordeaux.
We didn't even discuss in Ulster, but I was just, like I said.
What can you say?
Look, I know they have a big injury list, but I was disappointed that they didn't play their guys. They don't have a huge amount of minutes under the belt for Ireland over the last month, so I would worry that manner of that defeat could carry into this weekend and possibly even into the Christmas Interpros, even though I do understand Richie Murphy's logic. Bordeaux are not going to be like Cast and Stade, because Yannick Brew is their head coach. He comes from Toulouse, the school of thought. Noel McNamara is their attack coach. He comes from Leinster. They are going to be all in to try and win the top 14 and the Champions Cup. So I'd be very surprised if they didn't send the full guns. And if they do, then I think Ulster are going to be very much up against it.
Yeah. And then in Cast?
Yeah, I think Munster, when I was there 2 years ago when we were talking about it, Munster won 16-13. It was Jack Crowley's first start in Europe. They really gritted it out, and I think they're going to need that as well. And in a way, I think, even though it'll be a different type of challenge, I think the needle that Stade brought to Thomond Park last weekend will actually set Munster up really well this weekend, because I'd say it's going to be a similar feisty affair. They've got a couple of players, like I said, coming back. You'd imagine Tyke Byrne will be back in the team. And like I said, there is a bit of a bounce now in Munster, so you'd hope that they can build on that.
Very good. Enjoy the trip. Safe travels. Cian Tracey, the Irish Independent.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much. That is our rugby show for this week.